Today, we're diving into one of history's great mysteries, a real vanishing act, the collapse of Roman Britain. I mean, think about it. How does an entire province, one that was buzzing with all the power and sophistication of Rome, just disappear? How does it leave behind ruins so massive that the people who came after could only believe they were built by giants? Well, let's find out.
Picture this. It's sometime in the 8th century. An Anglo-Saxon poet is wandering through the rubble of what was once a grand Roman city, and they're just completely blown away by what they're seeing. So awestruck, in fact, that they write this poem, The Ruin. Looking at these impossibly huge buildings, they could only come to one conclusion. A race of giants must have lived here.
And that's really the core question for us today, isn't it? The poet's questions are our questions. Who were these incredible builders who managed to tame this wild island? And what on earth could have happened to make their entire world just crumble into dust?
So, to really get a handle on what was lost, we first have to appreciate what the Romans actually built. Let's take a look at Britannia when it was at its absolute peak.
For almost 100 years, Rome had tried and failed to get a foothold here. Julius Caesar gave it a shot, even the Emperor Caligula. But it was Claudius who finally pulled it off. He shows up with 4 legions. We're talking 20,000 soldiers, and get this, even a war elephant. And with just ruthless Roman efficiency, they started to build.
And here's the wild part, the sheer speed of this transformation. Marshy little fishing villages became gleaming cities. The native Britons, who were living in timber roundhouses, were suddenly seeing marble buildings, walking on heated floors, and tasting things like pepper from all the way over in India. This was truly a golden age.
But beneath all that glitter, all that marble, Britannia was always a really troubled place. It was incredibly expensive to hold. It was, for all intents and purposes, the empire's wild, untamed frontier.
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. You had these 2 Britons. Inside the cities, you had these fortified green zones where Roman officials lived it up. But the second you stepped outside those walls, the countryside was a hotbed of rebellion. Tribal loyalties were still incredibly strong, and the Romans even had this dismissive slang for the natives, brincunciuli, which basically means nasty little Britons. There was no real unity here.
And just look at this number, 40,000 soldiers. To hold down one relatively small island, Rome had to park 1/8 of its entire army there. And that created a very dangerous and ultimately fatal paradox.
So this brings us to the core of the problem, the real reason things fell apart. You see, that massive army wasn't just for defense, it was a temptation. And it led to a fatal mistake that would be repeated over and over and over again.
Here's the trap. It was simple and it was deadly. If you could command the army in Britain, you controlled one of the most powerful military forces in the entire empire. Powerful enough, in fact, to make a play for Rome itself. And whenever civil war broke out back home, that temptation just became irresistible.
Let's look at a perfect example, a guy named Claudius Albinus. A civil war for the emperor's throne kicks off, and Albinus, sitting up in Britain, sees his shot. He gives a big speech, his legions cheer for him, and then he does the unthinkable. He takes every last soldier off the island and sails for the mainland. In the end, he fails, and Britain, now completely defenseless, just collapses into chaos.
And the craziest part? This wasn't a one-off, not even close. Ambitious generals like Magnus Maximus and even the future Emperor Constantine would do the exact same thing. Every single time Rome showed a flicker of weakness, the governor of Britain would gamble it all, drain the island of its defenders, and leave it to be torn apart by raiders.
Okay, so after 2 centuries of this cycle of ambition and abandonment, the province was basically hollowed out. Now let's look at the final events that snapped the last few threads connecting Britain to the Roman world.
It all happened so fast. It was just one brutal blow after another. First, in 367, you get this massive coordinated attack called the Great Barbarian Conspiracy. Picts from the north, Saxons from the sea, they all strike at once. The defenses are overwhelmed. Then, not even 20 years later, Magnus Maximus does it again, taking the army to chase the throne. By 410, a desperate emperor Honorius, who's busy dealing with the Goths sacking Rome itself, basically just sends a letter saying, "You're on your own."
And the collapse wasn't just political, it was total. You can literally see it in the archaeology. Expensive swords just left on the ground. Iron becomes so rare that people are buried in unnailed coffins. The great public baths, the very symbol of Roman life, fall silent. This is what the end of a world actually looks like. Within a single generation, Londinium, a city of nearly 30,000 people, was a ghost town, just empty. So when new groups like the Anglo-Saxons showed up, they didn't see a fallen civilization. They saw something so impossibly grand that it could only have been built by giants.
And just like that, we've come full circle. That poet who wrote The Ruin, he saw the end of the story, but he never knew the beginning. The rebuilders perished, armies into the earth. They perished because their ambitious generals led them away on fatal campaigns for power, leaving everything they had built to just crumble.
The fall of Roman Britain really shows us that even the most impressive civilizations can be hollowed out from the inside, undone by their own built-in flaws. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? When future generations look back at the ruins of our time, what story are they going to tell?